I swore I would never tell anyone what happened that night, but every time I look at my son, I see the secret I've been hiding. And now the one person who saved me is gone, and I don't know if I can carry it alone.
Welcome to Reddit Toxic Family Telltales channel. New episode every day.
My dad threw me out of the house, and that's when I finally learned what family really meant. When he found out I was pregnant, he didn't care about how it happened. He didn't care that the man was old enough to be my father, or that I never had a choice in any of it. All he saw was shame. All he saw was a problem he wanted gone. So one freezing night, he dragged me out of the house and left me standing there with nothing but a couple of garbage bags. I was 16. Just a kid. And suddenly I had no home. No plan. Nowhere to go. I remember sitting in this park bathroom, shivering so badly my teeth wouldn't stop clattering, trying to press my hands over my stomach like that would protect the baby I never even wanted. And the whole time I was terrified I wouldn't make it through the night. By morning, I couldn't stay in the park anymore, not after the men who kept circling back, staring at me like I was prey. I snuck into the school bathroom, thinking I could hide there until I figured something out. That's where Miss Nyla found me. She was my English teacher, the one who always told me I could write my way out of this town if I just believed in myself. The moment she saw me, my garbage bags, my swollen eyes, I broke. I collapsed and sobbed so heavy I couldn't even breathe. She didn't hesitate. She pulled me into her arms and whispered, "You're coming home with me." That was the first hug I'd had since that night. And in that moment, I realized just how badly I needed someone to tell me I wasn't disgusting. She canceled her classes right then and drove me to her house. I cried the whole way because kindness felt so foreign it hurt. Miss Nyla lived alone in this cozy home full of books stacked on every surface and cats who wouldn't stop curling up against my stomach, like they could sense the life inside me. She turned her office into my bedroom, came to every doctor's appointment, and whenever the nurses assumed she was my mother, we never corrected them. The night when I'd be bent over the toilet with morning sickness, she'd sit on the bathroom floor with me, holding my hair back and talking about her wife Marina, who had passed away 3 years earlier. They'd spent a decade trying for children but never got the chance. "Maybe you and this little one are my second chance," she whispered once as I sobbed into her shoulder. And in that moment, I realized this stranger was being the mother mine refused to be. We fell into a rhythm. She'd grade papers while I worked on my online classes. My belly grew, and with it, this tiny flicker of hope I didn't think I'd ever feel. Maybe I could love this baby. She'd rest her hand on my stomach and tell the baby about all the books they'd read together, all the places they'd see. And slowly, I started to believe her. When Oliver was finally born, she stayed by my side through 19 agonizing hours of labor. I screamed for my mother, begged for my parents, but no one came. They ignored every call from the hospital. Miss Nyla never left. She held my hand through every contraction, cut the cord herself, and when Oliver's tiny hand wrapped around her finger, both of us broke down in tears. "Can he call you Grandma?" I asked through sobs. She kissed his soft little head and whispered yes. We brought him home together and created something I never thought I'd have, a family. In that little book-filled house, we built a strange, beautiful life. She taught Oliver songs in different languages while I taught him to laugh at my silly faces. His first steps? He took them trying to grab her glasses because they sparkled in the light. He called me Mama, and he called her Nana. And that's when it hit me, family isn't about blood. It's about choosing each other day after day. We were happy. Truly happy, in a way I never thought possible after everything that happened. Oliver had just turned 2 when my past came crashing back into our little sanctuary. A cousin had snapped a photo of us at the park, me pushing him on the swings, his hair flying in the wind, and posted it online without asking. I didn't think much of it at first. But the next day, there he was. My father. He stood on our porch like a ghost from another life, wearing an expensive suit that screamed power, not remorse. His eyes were cold, but his words were rehearsed. Mom was dying of guilt, he said. She wanted to meet her grandson. If I'd just come home and apologize for the shame I'd caused, maybe they'd work something out. He said it like I was the one who had done something wrong. Before I could even speak, Miss Nyla appeared at my side. She stepped between us like a wall, her voice calm but cutting. "Leave now, or I call the police for child abandonment." "That's my daughter you're interfering with," my father bellowed, his voice echoing off the porch. Oliver clung to my legs, eyes wide, trembling at this angry stranger. "She became my daughter the day you threw her away," Miss Nyla said, her teacher voice slicing through the tension like a blade, the same voice that could silence an entire classroom in seconds. My father's face flushed purple. He jabbed a finger at her and hissed accusations, calling her a predator, saying she was taking advantage of vulnerable girls, promising to ruin her reputation. I wanted to vanish into the floorboards. But Miss Nyla didn't flinch. She smiled, small but sure. "Everyone already knows I'm the woman who saved your daughter when you failed her." Her words landed like a gavel. The next morning, the house felt too quiet. She didn't come to breakfast, and before my brain could even catch up, my heart already knew something was wrong. I ran to her room and found her crumpled on the floor, clutching her chest, gasping my name like she had something she needed to tell me. The paramedics worked on her for what felt like forever. 40 minutes of compressions, IVs, and oxygen masks, while Oliver kept asking, "Why won't Nana wake up?" His little voice was so confused, so scared. Her skin was already gray, her hands cold. I begged them to try harder because she wasn't just a teacher, she was our only family. She made it to the hospital alive, but barely. Machines were doing her breathing now, her heart pumping only because of tubes and wires. A doctor handed me papers with shaking hands. "She made you her medical proxy last year," he said. "She doesn't want extraordinary measures. You'll have to decide soon." I sat by her bed, holding her cold hand, whispering over and over, "Please don't leave us." Oliver crawled onto the chair beside me, playing with her limp fingers like he always did during their morning counting game. "Why isn't Nana singing the good morning song?" he asked, tugging on my shirt. I couldn't answer. My throat felt like it was closing. Just yesterday, she'd been on our porch, standing up to my father with that fierce, steady voice. Now her face looked like faded newspaper, and the machines were the only thing keeping her here. And I didn't know how to let go. The doctor cleared his throat and stepped closer, holding a clipboard with papers clipped neatly at the top. His finger landed on a signature, her signature. Miss Nyla's name, written in that same neat, looping handwriting I'd seen on hundreds of graded essays. He explained, gently but firmly, that I was her medical proxy. My hand shook so badly I couldn't even hold the clipboard still long enough to read the words. All I could make out was the line where she had written she didn't want extraordinary measures. No drawn-out machines. No fighting against what her body couldn't take. The doctor told me I didn't have to decide right away, but that honoring her wishes would be important. Meanwhile, Oliver started crying, loud, heartbreaking cries that echoed in the sterile room. He was hungry, scared, and overwhelmed by the constant beeping machines. That's when a woman with kind eyes and a gentle voice walked in. She introduced herself as Constance Parker, the hospital social worker. She carried a thick folder under her arm and spoke with this soft, steady tone that made my chest feel a little less tight. She led us down the hall to a small room stocked with toys. While Oliver busied himself stacking blocks, Constance sat across from me and calmly explained what it meant to be a medical proxy. She slid pamphlets across the table, outlined support services the hospital offered, and then handed me her card with her personal number scrawled across it. "I'll be here through everything," she promised. For the first time that day, I felt the tiniest flicker of relief. Later, Dr. Wesley Wong joined us. He pulled up a chair and, with hands folded in front of him, explained what had happened to Miss Nyla's heart and brain. He showed me, motioning with his fingers, how her heart had stopped for 40 long minutes. Paramedics had managed to bring it back, but her brain had gone without oxygen for too long. He wanted to run more tests the next morning, but his eyes, gentle, apologetic, told me more than his words did. 40 minutes without oxygen usually meant severe damage. Oliver tugged on my sleeve throughout, asking in his small, hopeful voice, "When can we go back to Nana's house for lunch?" My heart cracked in half. Technically, children weren't allowed in the ICU, but the nurses bent the rules for Oliver. He refused to eat unless he could see Nana, and every attempt to move him from her side ended in tears. So I sat with him, distracting him with coloring books while doctors shuffled in and out with updates I could barely absorb. Constance offered to arrange volunteers to watch Oliver during the serious meetings, but I wasn't sure I could let him out of my sight. That night, I curled up in the stiff plastic chair beside Miss Nyla's bed, Oliver finally asleep on my chest, thumb tucked in his mouth. I stared at her, motionless under all the tubes and wires, and my mind kept drifting back to the very first night she took me in. She'd made me chamomile tea and let me sob for hours, never pressing for details, never asking me to explain. All she said again and again was, "You're safe now." And for the first time in my life, I believed it. Now I found myself whispering those same words back to her, though her chest rose and fell only because of machines. My fear kept crashing over me in waves, raw, suffocating waves. In the back of my mind, I couldn't stop replaying my father's face from yesterday, purple with rage, shouting that she was some kind of predator, swearing he'd expose her. His voice clawed at me, filling me with dread. Constance must have noticed the way my breathing turned shallow, my hands trembling. She asked quietly if there were safety concerns. And so I told her, about my father showing up, about what he said, about the way he tried to twist her kindness into something ugly. She nodded, scribbled something on her clipboard, and said she'd put a protective note in the system immediately. For a moment, I felt less alone. But when I turned back to the bed, gripping her cold hand, I couldn't shake the thought that without her, Oliver and I would be orphans. That night, after Oliver finally drifted off on the little cot the nurses had squeezed into the corner, I sat down with Miss Nyla's papers. My hands trembled as I unfolded the advance directive, reading through line after line of cold, legal language about ventilators and feeding tubes. My eyes kept blurring, but I forced myself to read the part where she'd made it clear, no artificial life support if there was no hope. At the very bottom, in blue pen, she had written her own note. Her handwriting, familiar, steady, the same loops I'd stared at on every graded essay. She wrote that she had watched Marina suffer on machines for 3 long weeks, and she never wanted that for herself. That single line broke me. The weight of it all came crashing down at once. I stumbled into the hallway and ended up hunched over by the vending machines, gasping for breath like my chest had a cinder block pressing down on it. Constance found me there, bent over, my palms on my knees. She didn't say much, just pressed her hand against my back and coached me through breathing. In for 4 counts, hold, then out. Again. Again. She kept repeating, "You're not alone in this." She slipped a grief pamphlet into my hand, but I shoved it into my pocket without even looking. I couldn't bring myself to read the word grief in print, not yet. The next morning, a woman named Betty arrived wearing a volunteer vest. She had this soft grandmother energy about her, the kind that instantly made kids feel safe. She offered to take Oliver to the playroom so I could focus on the doctors. My first instinct was to refuse. How could I hand him to someone I didn't know? But Oliver's eyes lit up when Betty knelt down and asked if he wanted to read a book. He grabbed his favorite one, the one Nana always read him, about the very hungry caterpillar. Betty promised they'd read it together and maybe try a puzzle too. I watched them walk away, my heart pounding in my chest, forcing myself to trust her. Down the hall, Constance was already waiting for me in a small meeting room. Papers were spread neatly across the table, and beside her sat a man in a wrinkled button-down shirt. He stood up when I entered, offering me a handshake. "This is Dave Gutierrez from Legal Aid," Constance explained. His handshake was firm but not intimidating, and his eyes had this tired kindness to them, like he'd seen too many people in pain to ever judge anyone. He opened a yellow legal pad covered in notes and began breaking things down. Step by step. Carefully. Patiently. He explained what it meant to hold medical proxy authority. How my role wasn't to decide what I wanted for Miss Nyla, but to carry out her wishes, based on what she had written and told me. He went back over the advance directive, reading each section slowly while I sat there trying to focus, my chest tightening all over again. But when I finally asked about my father, about whether he could swoop in and try to take Oliver, Dave's whole demeanor changed. He leaned forward, his voice low but certain. My father had no claim. None. He'd abandoned me while I was pregnant, he'd never established any legal connection to Oliver, and he had no grounds to interfere. As for the medical proxy, Dave said it was ironclad. Miss Nyla had done everything properly, with witnesses and notarization. No one could take that away. He did mention there might be estate issues if something happened, but that was for later. The relief hit me like a tidal wave. I started sobbing right there in that little room, my body folding in on itself. Dave slid a box of tissues across the table without a word, and Constance sat beside me, rubbing circles into my back as I cried into my hands. For the first time in days, I felt like maybe, just maybe, we weren't completely powerless. After I finally managed to pull myself together, I told Dave I needed another opinion. I couldn't make a decision about Miss Nyla's life without being absolutely sure. My voice shook when I said it, but Dave didn't flinch. He nodded, calm as ever, and told me that was more than reasonable, that it actually showed I was taking my responsibilities seriously. We walked back to the ICU, where Dr. Wong was standing by her monitors, adjusting settings with quiet precision. My heart was pounding, but I forced myself to ask him straight out for a second neurological assessment. I half expected him to sigh, to act like I was being difficult. But he didn't. He looked me in the eye and said he completely understood. He promised to schedule it first thing the next morning with their top neurologist. He even added that I was being thorough and responsible. That tiny bit of reassurance felt like someone had pulled me up for air when I'd been drowning. Just then, Oliver came racing back from the playroom, his little sneakers squeaking on the tile. Betty followed behind, smiling softly, holding out a crayon drawing he'd made. Him and Nana sitting side by side with a book. Oliver scrambled into my lap and held the picture up proudly. Then, with that innocent seriousness only toddlers have, he pointed at all the machines surrounding her bed and asked, "Are the doctors fixing Nana's broken head?" My throat locked up, but I managed to whisper that the doctors were trying their very best. Betty touched my shoulder gently before slipping out of the room, leaving me rocking Oliver as he clutched that picture like it was treasure. The next morning, my phone jolted me awake before Oliver even stirred. On the line was a woman who introduced herself from the school district's HR department. Her tone was formal, clipped. She said they had received a complaint about inappropriate conduct between Ms. Nyla and a student. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My whole body went ice cold because I knew exactly who was behind it. My father. Even with her lying unconscious in a hospital bed, hooked to machines, he was still trying to destroy her. The HR woman kept stressing it was just procedure, that they had to investigate any complaint no matter how unlikely. I could hear in her voice that she didn't buy it, but still, just hearing those words made me want to throw the phone against the wall. Someone would need to interview me eventually, she said. For now, it was just preliminary fact-finding. I hung up, shaking with anger, my stomach twisting in knots. Then Oliver stirred on his little hospital cot, rubbing his eyes, and I forced myself to swallow it all down. He couldn't see me fall apart again. But that afternoon, things got worse. During lunch, Oliver pressed his forehead against my shoulder, whimpering that his tummy hurt. When I touched his skin, it was burning hot. The ICU nurse came over, checked his temperature, and the numbers made my stomach drop. 101.4. Too high. They told me he needed to go to the pediatric emergency department right away. I didn't want to leave Miss Nyla's side, not even for a minute, but I had no choice. I carried Oliver 3 floors down, my arms aching, his little body heavy and trembling against me. And then we sat in that waiting room for 40 agonizing minutes before anyone could see us. He kept crying for Nana, begging for her to kiss his forehead and make the OE go away like she always did when he was sick. The nurses were kind but rushed, bouncing between patients. Finally, after what felt like forever, a doctor said it was just a mild virus, probably brought on by stress and being in the hospital so much. They gave him some fever medicine, told me to keep him hydrated, and sent us back upstairs. But the whole time, my heart felt split in two, half desperate to be with Oliver, half desperate to be back in that ICU room holding Miss Nyla's hand. By the time Oliver and I made it back to the ICU that evening, Dr. Wong was already waiting. Beside him stood another doctor I hadn't met before. Their faces told me the truth before a single word was spoken. Still, Dr. Wong walked me through it carefully. He explained that the second neurological exam had been completed that morning, while I was down in pediatrics with Oliver. The results were devastating. The other doctor pulled up scans on his tablet, pointing with his stylus at the dark patches spread across the images. He explained that Miss Nyla had suffered a severe anoxic brain injury, her brain starved of oxygen for too long. There was only minimal activity left, and even that was just her brainstem, handling the most basic functions because of the machines. There was no possibility of recovery. No coming back. The words hit me like a series of blows to the chest. I couldn't breathe. But part of me was grateful they weren't dressing it up with false hope. They respected me enough to be honest. Constance appeared quietly at my side, her voice calm, steady. She told me she'd scheduled a family meeting for the next morning. The entire care team would be there to discuss goals of care and next steps. She assured me it was standard procedure, that I wouldn't have to face the decision alone. That night, I sat by Miss Nyla's bedside, her hand cold in mine, Oliver tossing restlessly in his cot with fever still clinging to his skin. I told her about his temperature, how he kept begging for her kisses, and even about the ridiculous HR complaint I knew was my father's doing. Then, I pulled out a notebook from my bag. My hand shook as I began writing her a letter, words I'd never been able to say out loud while she was awake. The ink blurred with tears as I wrote about that first morning in the school bathroom, how she had saved me when nobody else cared. How she had become the mother I had always needed. I promised that Oliver would grow up knowing his Nana was the bravest woman alive, the woman who chose us when everyone else walked away. When I finished, my voice broke as I read it out loud to her still, silent body. Oliver sat cross-legged on the floor beside me, coloring with crayons, occasionally glancing up as if waiting for Nana to answer back. 2 of her colleagues slipped into the room quietly while I read. They didn't say much, just squeezed my shoulder, their eyes glassy, before placing a cardboard box on a chair and leaving without a sound. Inside were dozens of cards. Handwritten notes from her students, messages from fellow teachers, bright drawings from kids who had loved her. Oliver lit up, tugging each one out of the box to admire the colorful pictures, giggling at the silly doodles. For a moment, the room felt alive with all the love she'd given to the world. That afternoon, Dave returned with his yellow legal pad and a stack of papers. His face was serious, his tone even more so. He told me plainly, with my father's escalating behavior, the confrontation, the false HR complaint, it was time to file for a no-contact order. He had already started the paperwork. He explained how the documented pattern of harassment would make a judge take it seriously. He slid the forms toward me, pointing to each spot that needed my signature. My hands were trembling, but I signed everywhere he indicated. Oliver perched on my lap playing with the cap of Dave's pen like it was a toy. For the first time in days, I felt a spark of safety, like someone with a clear head was building walls to protect us while mine was spinning out of control. Constance walked back in while Dave was still sorting through papers and found me frozen in place, staring at the hospital billing statement that had already landed in my lap. The numbers made my stomach drop. Just one day in the ICU cost more than I'd ever seen in my life, numbers so big they didn't even feel real. She sat down quietly next to me and opened another folder. Her voice stayed gentle as she explained that the hospital had charity care programs for situations exactly like mine. We spent the next hour filling out forms together while Oliver sat at the edge of the bed pressing the buttons, giggling at the way it made the mattress move. Constance helped me list my tiny income from online tutoring and showed me where to write that I had 0 savings. She kept repeating, "Miss Nyla's insurance will cover most of this. We're not going to let you drown in debt." That reassurance cracked something open in me. I'd been imagining losing everything, our home, our safety, on top of losing her. The relief made me cry again, ugly sobs I couldn't control. Constance just rubbed my arm and let me cry until it passed. That evening, my phone started lighting up with notifications from people I hadn't spoken to since high school. A friend sent me a screenshot from the town's Facebook community page. My father had posted a long, venomous rant calling Miss Nyla a predator who groomed vulnerable girls. He twisted every good thing she'd done into something sick, claiming she'd taken advantage of me when I was homeless and pregnant. Comments were already piling up, some from people who knew her, defending her as the best teacher they'd ever had, but others from strangers who believed his lies, calling for investigations and demanding answers. My hand shook as I hovered over my keyboard, desperate to type the truth, to scream it, to tell the world she saved me when no one else would. But before I could, Dave gently took the phone from my hands. "Absolutely not," he said. "Anything you post could be used against you later. We need to stay quiet for legal reasons." His voice was calm but firm. "Killed me." Watching her reputation shredded online while she lay dying in a hospital bed felt like another betrayal. Another wound I couldn't stop. The next morning, we had the care meeting Constance had arranged. Conference room was filled with doctors, nurses, and a woman who introduced herself as the hospital's ethics consultant. She had a calm, steady way of speaking that somehow made my racing thoughts slow down just a little. She explained quality of life, suffering, what it means to truly honor someone's wishes. She pulled out Miss Nyla's advance directive again and read the parts where she had specifically said she didn't want machines keeping her alive if there was no hope. Her voice was soft but firm as she said, keeping her on life support when she explicitly asked not to isn't love. It's going against what she believed in. By the end of the meeting, I was sobbing so hard I could barely breathe. But beneath the grief, something shifted. For the first time since the machines started their endless beeping, I understood what I had to do, even though every single part of me wanted to hold on forever. That night was the hardest yet. Oliver thrashed in the little hospital cot, crying out for Nana over and over. He'd started sucking his thumb again, something he hadn't done since he was barely one, and the sight of it cracked my heart wide open. Felt like I was watching him slide backward, like the ground was falling out from under both of us. I held him tight against me in that narrow cot while he sobbed, whispering for Nana to wake up and sing their special song, the one that kept the monsters away. I kept rocking him, trying to keep my own voice steady, telling him that Nana loved him even while she was sleeping. But he only cried harder because even at 2 years old, he could sense the truth. Something was really, really wrong. The next morning, Dave told me we needed to go to Miss Nyla's house to collect important documents before anything happened. Just the thought of it made my stomach knot. Driving there felt wrong without her in the passenger seat, pointing out red cars for Oliver to spot like they always did. When we reached the house, using the keys she'd given me felt like sneaking in like I was a thief. She'd said 1,000 times it was our home too, but without her there, it didn't feel that way. The smell hit me as soon as I walked through the door, that mix of lavender lotion and old books that had meant safety for 3 years. It was like walking into a memory. Her coffee cup still sat on the kitchen table next to a stack of essays, her reading glasses perched on top like she'd just stepped out for a minute. Oliver bolted straight for his toy box in the living room, pulling out the blocks Nana had given him for his birthday. His giggles echoed through the house while I stood frozen in the doorway, feeling like I might shatter. Dave put a gentle hand on my back and steered me toward her office. "We'll start here," he murmured. In her office, everything was as perfectly organized as she'd always kept it. On the desk was a large binder labeled important documents in her flawless teacher handwriting. Inside were tabs for everything: insurance policies, bank accounts, the house deed, each section neatly organized with sticky notes explaining what each thing was. She'd even left instructions, anticipating that one day I'd need help making sense of it all. The very back, a sealed envelope with my name scrawled across the front, stopped me cold. My hand shook so badly I could barely tear it open. Inside was a letter in her handwriting, long, looping, steady even through my tears. She wrote that Oliver and I had become the children she and Marina had always dreamed of. She told me that the day she found me in the school bathroom was the day her life began to make sense again after losing Marina. She wrote about how proud she was watching me become a mother despite everything, how it had been the greatest privilege of her life. And at the end, she told me she knew I was strong enough to take care of Oliver no matter what happened. That she would always be proud of her daughter, even if the law didn't recognize it that way. I sank to the floor of her office, clutching that letter like it was the only thing keeping me upright, my tears falling onto the paper and smudging the ink. In the next room, Oliver kept playing with his blocks, laughing at something only he could see while I held onto the letter that felt like goodbye. Dave sat with me on the floor of her office, the binder spread open between us. Page by page, he walked me through it, explaining each section in plain language I could actually understand. My chest ached with every turn of the page. Miss Nyla, Miss Anna, had left everything to me and Oliver in her will. Everything. But there was a catch. She'd refinanced the house years ago to help cover Marina's cancer treatments, and there was still a mortgage. Hidden in the back were statements for credit cards and medical debts I never even knew existed. She'd carried all of it quietly, never saying a word because she didn't want us to worry. Dave told me probate would take months, maybe longer, and there was a real chance we'd have to sell the house to settle everything. The thought of losing her home on top of losing her nearly crushed me. But Dave's voice was steady. "We'll take it one step at a time," he promised. When we got back to the hospital, Dr. Wong was waiting. His expression was gentle, but what he said made my chest tighten like a vice. He wanted to reduce Miss Nyla's sedation the next morning to run one final test. Just to be absolutely thorough. He explained carefully that we shouldn't expect any change. Every previous test had already told the story. But he also understood I needed to see with my own eyes that we had tried everything. I agreed without hesitation. 'Cause deep down I already knew the truth. But I had to see it for myself before I could ever let go. The next morning, the room was full of quiet tension as the nurses adjusted her medications. Dr. Wong stood with two other doctors, their eyes fixed on the monitors. I held Oliver in my lap, his little toy car zooming back and forth across my arm as he made vrooming noises, blissfully unaware of what was about to happen. They started with her name. Dr. Wong leaned close, calling it out firmly. No response. He shined lights into her eyes, one after the other. Nothing. Her pupils stayed dull, unfocused, unchanging. He moved his hand across her face, searching for any flicker of recognition. Still nothing. Then came the painful stimuli, pressure on her nail beds, firm squeezes meant to trigger reflex. Her fingers stayed limp, her body motionless except for the artificial rhythm of the machines. For 30 long minutes they tested. 30 minutes of silence, broken only by the hum of machines and Oliver's little car wheels clattering against the plastic chair. Finally, Dr. Wong put his hand gently on my shoulder. His voice was low but steady. There's no meaningful brain function left. She isn't going to wake up. The machines are keeping her body alive, but she's not really here anymore. The words ripped through me, even though I'd known them in my bones. Oliver looked up at me with wide, hopeful eyes and asked, "Did they fix Nana yet?" And I had to shake my head, forcing out a whisper while holding back everything breaking inside me. "No, baby!" They couldn't fix her. That afternoon, Constance walked in with another woman, a soft-spoken grief counselor who specialized in helping young caregivers. She pulled up a chair right next to Miss Nyla's bed and sat with me, her presence calm in a way that felt almost like an anchor. She told me straight out how impossible this situation was for someone my age, and for the first time in days I felt like someone actually saw me. She explained that it was okay to feel everything at once, anger, fear, guilt, overwhelm. That none of it made me weak or bad. Then she taught me a breathing technique, counting to 4 while inhaling, holding it for 4, then exhaling for 4. I tried it right there, my palms pressed against my thighs, and it actually helped. My head stopped spinning for a few seconds. She told me that anticipatory grief was just as real as grief after someone's gone. That morning Miss Nyla, while she was still technically alive, wasn't wrong. It was normal. She gave me permission to feel everything without judgment and even admitted it was normal to wish someone else could make the decision for me. Hearing that out loud made my eyes sting. When I left the room to grab some water, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something in me answered. It was my mother. Her voice sounded small, frayed at the edges, asking if it was true about Miss Nyla being in the hospital. She said she'd heard from my cousin, who'd seen the Facebook posts. She said she wanted to see Oliver, that maybe we could work something out. Her words came out in this painful mix of apology and conditions. She wanted me to come home to just say sorry to Dad for the trouble I'd caused. She whispered about meeting me somewhere without him knowing because he'd be furious if he found out she'd called. I felt my hands tightening around the phone, rage rising in my throat. Even now, she couldn't just be my mother without strings attached. Even now, she was still half apologizing for him. I told her, voice shaking but firm, that she could only meet Oliver if my father had absolutely nothing to do with it, and only in a public place with other people around. She hesitated, then agreed, her voice trembling as she admitted how scared she was to go behind his back. That's when it hit me, she was still trapped. Still living in the same cage I'd escaped when Miss Nyla found me. We agreed to meet at the park next week, if she could get away without him noticing. Right after that call ended, the HR person from the school rang. My stomach dropped again, bracing for more bad news, but her tone was completely different. She told me their investigation had found nothing, no evidence of misconduct, no merit to my father's claims. Teacher after teacher had written statements defending Miss Nyla's professionalism. The file would technically stay open for paperwork, but it was clear they saw through his lies. It was one tiny victory in a world that felt like it was crumbling around me. For the first time that week, I felt a spark of vindication, a flicker of light inside all the darkness. The next morning, a specialist who worked with children came to help Oliver understand what was happening to his Nana. She knelt right down on the floor with him, spreading out a set of dolls she'd brought. In a soft, steady voice, she explained how Nana's body was very, very sick and how the machines were helping her breathe. Oliver stared wide-eyed as she moved the dolls around, acting out what she said. He seemed to understand on some level, but he kept asking if Nana would be better tomorrow. The woman never lost patience. She kept explaining in simple words that sometimes bodies get too sick to heal. Oliver nodded at all the right moments, but I could see his eyes flicking to the doorway over and over, waiting for Nana to walk in. That afternoon, I buckled Oliver into the car and drove to the cemetery where Marina was buried. Something in me felt like Miss Nyla would want her to know what was happening. The place was quiet, sunlight washing over the rows of stones. Oliver darted around picking dandelions while I sat by Marina's headstone, tears dripping onto my hands as I whispered everything. I told Marina how Miss Nyla had saved us, how she'd become our family, and how I didn't know how to let her go even though I knew it was what she wanted. My voice cracked when I admitted how scared I was to do this alone. Oliver toddled back with a fistful of dandelions, his cheeks flushed. He set them down carefully on the stone. "Will Nana play with this lady in heaven?" he asked, his little voice trembling. Through my tears, I managed to smile and say yes. Then I wrapped my arms around him while he waved goodbye to Marina's grave. Back at the hospital, Dr. Wong was waiting. One look at his face and I knew what he was going to say. His tone was gentle but firm as he explained that keeping Miss Nyla on life support wasn't helping her anymore, and it went against everything she'd written in her own hand. She had made it clear she didn't want to be kept alive by machines. The weight of his words pressed down on my chest like a physical force. That evening, after Oliver finally settled on the floor with his toy cars, I sat alone in Miss Nyla's room and unfolded her letter again. Her handwriting blurred through my tears as I read the part where she wrote about not wanting to linger on machines, about trusting me to make the right choice. She'd written about how proud she was of the mother I'd become, how lucky Oliver was to have me, and how she would always be watching over us just as Marina had watched over her. It felt like she was speaking straight to me, giving me permission to do what my heart couldn't yet bear. Every part of me wanted to keep her here, even if it was only her body breathing because of machines. But I knew that wasn't what she wanted. Dave came by the next morning, a folder tucked under his arm. He laid out the papers for the restraining order against my father and told me the court date was already set for next month. He explained that the Facebook rants, the fake HR complaint, those things showed a clear pattern of harassment judges take seriously. Holding those papers in my hands felt like Miss Nyla was still protecting us, even from her hospital bed. That same afternoon, my father showed up at the hospital. Security was waiting. They'd been warned ahead of time thanks to Constance. From upstairs, I heard his voice before I even saw him, booming through the lobby as he demanded to see his grandson, screaming about his so-called rights. People stopped to stare as he raged, his face red, his fists waving. But the guards stood firm. They handed him a written notice. He wasn't allowed back. If he tried, he'd be arrested. I watched from the window above, my stomach churning. Fear still twisted inside me, but layered on top of it was something new. Protection. Safety. All because of the people Miss Nyla had put in our lives. Later, Betty took Oliver to the playroom so I could sit in on one more counseling session. The grief counselor helped me practice those breathing exercises again, grounding me for what I knew was coming. She reminded me that grief and responsibility were two different things, that my sorrow was mine to carry, but honoring Miss Nyla's wishes was an act of love. Respecting her choice is the truest way to love her, she said. The words lodged in my chest like stones, heavy but steady. I left that session knowing what I had to do. Even though every cell in my body screamed against it, the decision was clear. The next morning, I found Dr. Wong in the hallway, scanning charts. My legs shook so badly I thought I might collapse, but I forced myself to walk up to him. My voice cracked when I told him we'd take Miss Nyla off the machines tomorrow, after Oliver and I had the chance to say goodbye properly. He nodded slowly, placing his hand gently on my shoulder for just a moment. Then he promised the nurses would make sure she was comfortable, that she'd have medicine so she wouldn't feel pain, and that no one would rush us. We'd have all the time we needed. When I went back to the waiting room, Oliver was crouched on the floor, pushing his toy cars in circles and making them crash. I scooped him into my arms and carried him down the hall, whispering into his hair as we walked into Nana's room. We spent the entire day making that room ours. Making it special. I brought in her favorite poetry book, the one she used to read to us every Sunday morning while the sunlight streamed through her living room window. The nurses helped us tape Oliver's crayon drawings all around her bed, stick figures of the three of us holding hands, bright suns, lopsided hearts. One nurse even brought paint so we could press Oliver's tiny hand against paper right next to Miss Nyla's larger one, their prints side by side forever. Oliver kissed each of Nana's fingers one by one, the way they did in their morning game, his little lips brushing against her cool skin. I played Marina's favorite song softly on my phone, the music floating through the sterile air like a prayer. Oliver's voice was small when he looked up at me and asked, "When will Nana wake up to see my pretty pictures?" I pulled him close, my chest breaking as I whispered into his hair. I couldn't give him the answer he wanted. All I could do was hold him tighter, rocking us both as the machines hummed around us. That night, after Oliver finally drifted off in the chair beside me, I propped my phone up on the nightstand and hit record. My hands shook as I looked into the camera, knowing this wasn't for me, it was for him, for the day he'd be old enough to understand. I told Oliver who Miss Nyla really was. How she saved us when no one else would. My voice cracked again and again as I explained that she chose to be his Nana, that she loved him from the very first second she laid eyes on him. I talked about the songs she taught him, the books she read, the way her laughter filled every room. I told him how brave she had been standing up to my father, how she fought for us when I didn't even know how to fight for myself. The video stretched on for 20 minutes, me crying, stopping, starting over, but I couldn't stop. I needed him to know everything. I needed him to remember her the way I did. The morning of the withdrawal came too soon. My entire body trembled as the respiratory team filed into the room. They explained each step softly, respectfully, while I clutched Miss Nyla's hand so tightly my knuckles burned white. Oliver sat in my lap, holding her other hand, humming the lullaby she always sang to him at bedtime. Then came the sound I'll never forget, the sharp hiss of the ventilator being disconnected, followed by silence. The endless machine noises we'd lived with for days vanished, and the room felt heavier without them. Her chest rose and fell on its own for the first time in days, but the breaths were shallow, uneven, far apart. I leaned close to her ear and whispered through tears that we loved her, that it was okay to go be with Marina, who was waiting. Oliver waved goodbye with his little hand and blew kisses toward her face, just like we taught him when leaving for daycare. For 30 agonizing minutes, her breathing slowed. With each pause, I poured out every word I could, every thank you, every piece of love and gratitude I'd never said enough. Then came the final breath, so faint I almost missed it. A full minute of stillness followed before the nurse checked her pulse, then quietly shook her head and wrote down the time. My body went numb. Oliver squirmed in my lap, patting her arm, begging her to wake up and sing their morning song. I held him tighter, my tears soaking his hair, wishing I could shield him from this moment. The doctor came in to confirm, signing the papers while nurses gently began disconnecting the monitors and IVs. They gave us the gift of an hour alone with her. Oliver climbed onto the bed, patting her cheeks, pleading for her to open her eyes. I sat there, one arm around him, one hand still holding hers, even though it was already cold. Constance stood silently in the doorway the entire time, a steady presence in case I needed her. Later, the organ donation coordinator explained she couldn't donate because of her age and the damage to her heart. Felt wrong. If anyone deserved to keep helping people after death, it was her. She'd spent her whole life saving others, why couldn't she do it now? The funeral home came to take her. I chose cremation because that's what she'd written in her papers. Principal of her school called, his voice breaking, to tell me they would hold a memorial service in the gym where she had taught for 20 years. When it was time to leave, Oliver screamed. He didn't understand why we had to walk away and leave Nana behind. He cried the whole way to the car, and I couldn't blame him, because leaving her there felt impossible. The next 2 weeks crawled by in a haze of paperwork, phone calls, and endless explanations I wasn't ready to give. How do you explain death to a 2-year-old who keeps wandering around asking where Nana went? Oliver searched for her in every corner, and each time I had to tell him she wasn't coming back, my heart cracked all over again. At least one weight lifted. The school's HR department officially closed their investigation. They sent me a letter that said in black and white there was zero evidence of misconduct. Seeing it written down felt like a small spark of justice in the middle of all this grief. Her teacher friends organized the most beautiful memorial I'd ever seen. The gym where she'd taught for 20 years was filled with photos from her whole career, lined along tables like a timeline of lives she'd touched. Students, some grown now, some still teenagers, stood at the microphone and read poems they'd written for her. One after another, they told stories about how she'd helped them through heartbreak, loss, or failure. A few hinted at how she'd supported a student in need without saying my name, but I knew. Tears streamed down my face the whole time. Oliver sat in the corner with his blocks, occasionally looking up and scanning the room like he expected Nana to appear any second. Each time, the hope in his eyes made me ache. Of course, my father showed up. Even with the restraining order already approved by the judge, he marched into that gym like he had a right to be there. He didn't get far. School security spotted him instantly and intercepted before he could reach us. They escorted him out while he shouted about his rights, his voice echoing through the gym. For once, no one listened. My mother was there too, sitting in the very back row. Tears streamed down her face, but she never approached. She just sat there, small and broken, while the people who actually loved Miss Nyla filled the room with their voices. And in that moment, surrounded by hundreds of people who adored her, my father's poison felt smaller, weaker, like his words couldn't touch her legacy anymore. After the service, Dave pulled me aside with his ever-present folder. His tone was steady, but the numbers he laid out made my stomach drop. Miss Nyla had taken out a second mortgage during Marina's cancer battle, and nearly all the equity was gone. The monthly payments were more than I could ever dream of affording, not with my patchwork tutoring jobs, not even with a full-time salary I didn't have. Dave recommended selling quickly before foreclosure swallowed everything. At least he said we could walk away with something. Packing up her house was like tearing pieces out of myself. Every mug, every photo, every book carried her scent, her laughter, her warmth. Oliver kept tugging on my shirt, asking when we were going home to Nana. I had no answer. We moved into a subsidized apartment that accepted my housing vouchers. 2 bedrooms, faded carpet, the faint smell of old cigarettes clinging to the walls. It wasn't much, but it wasn't a shelter. It was ours. I refused to leave her behind. I packed every single one of her books, even though we didn't have shelves yet. That first night in the apartment, Oliver pulled stack after stack from the boxes, insisting I read them in Nana's voice. I tried. But no matter how hard I mimicked her rhythm, her warmth, her way of making words glow, he knew it wasn't the same. So we made a promise instead. We cleared a little corner of the room and made a shelf just for Nana's books. Each night before bed, Oliver touched every one of them in turn, like a ritual, like he was saying goodnight to her. The next morning, I sat at the wobbly little table in our apartment with my laptop open while Oliver crunched on his cereal beside me. The community college application glowed on the screen. Personal statement box sat there empty, daring me to fill it. My fingers hovered, shaking, before I started to type. I wrote about Miss Nyla, how she saved my life when my own family threw me away. How she taught me that words could be more than just sentences on paper, they could be a way out. I typed through tears about being 16, pregnant, and homeless until a teacher found me and decided I was worth saving. 2 days later, an admissions counselor called. Her voice cracked as she said she'd read my essay 3 times. She told me she was waiving my application fee, that the school had resources for single parents, and she listed out names of support services. I barely made it through the call before hanging up and sobbing, because all I could hear in my head was Miss Nyla's voice. Education will be your way forward. But while one door opened, another memory still tore me apart. Oliver's first day at subsidized daycare. That morning was like ripping a bandage off a wound that wasn't even close to healing. He clung to me, arms locked around my neck so tightly I could hardly breathe. He screamed for Nana, screamed for me, while the teacher tried gently to pry him away. I backed out of the room, tears blinding me, and the second the door shut behind me, I ran to the parking lot and threw up from guilt. The teacher called later that day to say he'd finally stopped crying, that he was quietly stacking blocks. By the third day, he only cried for 10 minutes. And by the second week, he ran to the door to show me a picture he'd drawn, only whimpering a little when I left. Small victories, but they felt like mountains. Around that time, my mother reached out. Text. She asked to meet at the park by the river. I said yes, but made it clear, if my father showed up, I'd walk away without a word. She came alone. Her face looked older, worn down, like the years had finally caught up with her. She brought a bag of toys for Oliver, who sprinted straight for the swings. She stood there watching him, tears brimming, and whispered apology after apology. Sorry she didn't protect me. Sorry she let him throw me out. Sorry she was too weak to leave him. I told her the truth, that sorry didn't give us those years back. But if she really wanted a place in our lives, I'd take what she could offer, as long as she respected my boundaries. She nodded through her tears and handed Oliver a stuffed elephant. He hugged it to his chest immediately, grinning while she broke down quietly beside me. Not long after, Dave called with the court date for the restraining order hearing. My stomach flipped, but he was calm, reassuring. The judge had already reviewed the evidence, the Facebook rants, the false school complaint, the endless harassment. The hearing itself lasted 20 minutes. My father's lawyer tried to argue about parental rights, but Dave stood steady, presenting screenshot after screenshot of threats and lies. The judge didn't hesitate. 3 years. That was the order. Any violation, and my father would be arrested immediately. Dave told me afterward the online attacks slowed down after that. My father still ranted on pages I didn't follow, still spewed venom about ungrateful daughters. But it didn't matter. His reach was shrinking. His voice was fading. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like Oliver and I could finally breathe. Tutoring website finally approved my profile, the same one I'd built using the teaching methods Miss Nyla had shown me back when I used to help her grade papers. My very first student was a middle schooler who couldn't wrap his head around essay structure. And without even thinking, I taught him the exact outline format Miss Nyla had drilled into me. It worked. By the next week, I had 3 more students. Within a month, I was tutoring 15 hours a week, on top of my own classes. The money barely stretched far enough to cover groceries and gas, but every single payment felt like proof. The proof that Oliver and I could survive. That her lessons were still alive through me. Oliver learned to entertain himself while I worked, building towers with his blocks, humming little tunes under his breath. Sometimes I'd slide a cup of goldfish crackers toward him just to keep him quiet during video calls. He'd grin at me with orange crumbs around his mouth like we were in on some private joke. For months after Miss Nyla passed, the school called. They were dedicating a memorial bench beneath her favorite reading tree, the one where she used to eat lunch with a book in hand. Principal asked if I would speak. I said yes, and then stayed up all night trying to write words big enough to honor her. In the end, I wrote about how teachers save lives simply by seeing the kids everyone else ignores. That morning, Oliver toddled across the apartment lawn, fists full of dandelions. For Nana, he said. When we reached the ceremony, I held him on my hip and stood at the microphone, my voice shaking as I told the story of a teacher who took in a pregnant 16-year-old no one else wanted, and gave her a family. By the time I finished, the entire English department was in tears. Students came up afterwards, some with shaky smiles, some with hugs, telling me how she had helped them too. Oliver waddled over to the bench, set his handful of dandelions on the seat, and patted it gently like he was petting a friend. At home, our bedtime routine became sacred. Every night, Oliver would pull down one of Nana's books, climb into my lap, and let me read. My voice would never sound like hers, but it didn't matter. We'd finish, and then he'd look at her picture on the dresser. Sometimes he'd tell it all about his day at daycare, what he ate for lunch, which kid pushed him on the playground. Sometimes he'd ask when she was coming back. But most nights he'd wave at the photo and say softly, "Night-night, Nana." The grief never went away, it sat in my chest, heavy as stone. But so did the memory of her voice telling me I was stronger than I knew. That last night, I lay in our tiny apartment, listening to Oliver's steady breathing. Beyond the thin walls, I heard the neighbors arguing, sirens wailing somewhere in the distance. My body ached from exhaustion, but we had made it through another day. And I knew tomorrow we'd make it through again. Oliver had just started saying mama more clearly that week. Every time the word left his lips, it sent me straight back to that moment years ago, when Miss Nyla cried tears of joy hearing him say Nana for the very first time. We were building something new from the pieces she left behind. Choosing each other every single day, just like she taught us. That's all for now. And honestly, if you made it all the way to the end of this, maybe it means you believe in second chances too.
Thanks for watching. Today's train wreck is over, but tomorrow's ride is already on track. Subscribe so you don't miss it.